Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and these are a handful of KZ earphones that a couple of weeks ago I unboxed and measured live here on Super Review, and today we're going to do a review of them. So this is the KZ EDX Pro, this is the KZ DQ6, the KZ ZEX, and the KZ ZEX Pro, or as we now know, it's no longer called the KZ ZEX Pro. As it turns out, this earphone, this one's now known as the KZ Crinacle CRN. So if you recall during that unboxing and measurement, right, we were taking the frequency responses of these earphones, and for the most part, like this one, and this one, they looked familiarly, that's a word, KZ, right? They're not the same frequency response, but you look at them, you're like, yeah, that's about what I expect. But here with the ZEX Pro, aka the CRN, the frequency response that we got was decidedly different. And it turns out that's for a reason, because famed IM reviewer Crinacle actually worked with KZ to tune this IM, and that was a thing that I didn't know at the time. I don't think anybody knew at the time except for KZ and Crinacle. And then about a week ago, they actually revealed it to everybody, just saying, hey, we actually worked on this IM together. Surprise. And it's kind of a good surprise, I guess. But what I was really interested to find out, especially after learning that, is KZ's traditional tuning, right? This is basically, I don't know. I spent some of that video kind of talking about why I haven't reviewed a KZ in a while. And part of it is because they all have very similar tuning. And then obviously here with the CRN, we get significantly different tuning. And what I wanted to figure out over the past week or so was, does that matter? How much of a difference does that, I think, more mature tuning that you get here with the CRN actually play into the listening experience? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So like all my other reviews, this is a live stream. If you're watching now live and you have any questions about anything that I don't quite get to in this video, feel free to drop it in the live chat. And at the end of the review, again, I'm going to do kind of 4 reviews really quickly here. At the end of the review, stick around. We'll have a little bit back and forth conversation, and hopefully I can answer any open questions you have. But otherwise, just a quick shout out to KZ for sending these all in for review. And I guess we'll just get to the table and start talking about build quality, physical stuff, and how each of these earphones differs. Although honestly, they're pretty similar in a lot of ways. And you know what? Maybe I should just go through these one by one rather than going through categories one by one. I mean, I can just start with the packaging, right? This is the packaging for the DQ6, but they all basically have the exact same packaging. What comes inside them is pretty limited, but honestly, for the prices that these things are, not a problem. You get the earphones, you get a cable, and then you get a set of tips. And interestingly, the tips between them kind of do vary a little bit. It seems almost random, but I don't know. I don't know that the tips in this case make too much difference. But I guess we can just, we'll just start with the EDX Pro, since this is the least expensive of the bunch. This one is, I believe it's like $14 or $15. It's a single dynamic driver. And frankly, I don't know, it's pretty handsome looking earphone, even if it wasn't just a $15 earphone. It is, a lightweight plastic shell. So, don't expect fantastic build quality, but honestly, I don't have any complaints about the build quality and definitely not about the look of the EDX Pro. One thing that did stand out to me, and this was not a thing that you necessarily got to see in the live unboxing and initial measurement of this, because I only measured one channel at a time, but when I later went back and measured both the left and the right channels, I was actually really impressed with the channel matching here on the EDX Pro. I mean, frankly, all of these have pretty solid channel matching. I don't really have any concerns with them, but the channel matching here in the EDX Pro is frankly pretty phenomenal, which it seemed notable here on a $15 earphone. But apart from that, okay, so we talked about the build. I mean, I could talk about the fit. This thing's fit pretty average for a KZ. It's a little bit bulbous and bulky back here, so the fit is not super secure, but honestly, I don't know, no real complaints with the fit. Generally about as comfortable as you could expect for an inexpensive earphone like that. But okay, I think that's about as much, frankly, as I can talk about the physical stuff. So let's talk about the sound here on the EDX Pro. And again, remember, this is a $15 single dynamic driver earphone. The tuning here is, it's very KZ. The tuning here is very V-shaped, which just means you get a lot of bass, you get a lot of upper mids and treble, and the mid-range itself is very much sacrificed. From that, you get a very tonally contrasty sound, which can be pretty exciting and pretty fun, but it's kind of like, I don't know, imagine like taking your TV color sliders, right? If you ever watch your TV, flip it into vivid mode and then crank up the vivid. Like that's kind of what this thing does to sound. So like it can be kind of fun and a little bit appealing in a certain sense, but when you get a little bit too much of it, it starts to feel like, okay, I would like something a little bit less in your face. But honestly, for, you know, a $15 earphone, it's frankly not too bad. You just don't get a whole lot of mid-range here. From that contrasty sound, you do actually get a pretty decent sense of soundstage, which, again, on a $15 IM is kind of a surprise. And the treble tuning of the bunch, maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but honestly, I often have issues with the treble on inexpensive earphones, and frankly, this was, of the bunch, the least offensive of the treble, in the treble region. So tonally, definitely not my thing, but it has a bit of an appeal for itself, and the bass honestly does have a pretty serious thump. So here on the EDX Pro, out of 5 stars, look, again, not my tonal preference, but this is frankly not a bad earphone. So I would give the EDX Pro a very solid 3 stars out of 5. Okay, so that's the EDX Pro. Let's bring in our next contestant here. This will be the KZ DQ6. Like the EDX Pro, this is a dynamic driver earphone, but this one actually has 3 dynamic drivers in it, which is pretty interesting. There's not a lot of earphones out there that have 3 dynamic drivers. And the price on this is a little bit more expensive, but still frankly pretty cheap. It's around 30 bucks. So 30 bucks for 3 dynamic drivers. We'll talk about the physical stuff. The cable that this thing comes with is exactly the same as the cable on the EDX Pro. Just a different color, but otherwise, behavior-wise, like it's the same cable. And frankly, for an inexpensive pack-in cable, this is not bad. It's not a plush cable or anything like that, but the behavior on this cable, and I guess let me unfurl it just to kind of show you, like you can see it doesn't hold its shape. It unfurls quite well. It doesn't get especially tangly. It is a flat cable, which can make it a little bit tedious to roadie wrap, but otherwise, like honestly, pretty decent little cable. In fact, I'm frankly considering getting some of these cables as spares to mod onto some KZ headphones. But I digress. Apart from that, let's see, what is different here about the build quality is you can see the aesthetic is a little bit different, and frankly, I think this is a pretty mature, handsome looking earphone. It does have, though, a very different shell shape, and I don't know if this is going to totally come across, but the DQ6 here has got this more custom, semi-custom molded shape that is definitely a more opinionated fit. And so where I talked about the EDX Pro being somewhat bulbous in the back, and in fact, let me pull it in here just for comparison, the EDX Pro is a little bit bulbous back here, and you can see that it's not shaped at all. The DQ6 does attempt to be a little bit more custom and form-fitted to your ear, but it's going to make a big difference what the shape of your individual ear is. And for me, honestly, I found this thing pretty uncomfortable. It's just that fin back here. When I put this thing in my ear, and let me go ahead and demonstrate it quickly on camera. When I fit these things into my ear, like they go in nice and easy, which is good. So the ergonomics are generally pretty good at first impression. Fits good, nice and secure. But up here where that little fin is, over, I don't know, it doesn't take long, maybe 15, 20 minutes. This thing frankly starts to cause like actual physical pain for me, which sounds a little dramatic, and I'm being a little dramatic, but it's really actually pretty uncomfortable. It just meant that the DQ6, wrong camera, the DQ6, I just frankly didn't like wearing for very long. Now, that's kind of okay because when it came to the sound, frankly, I also didn't like it that much. Okay, first of all, there was quite a bit of driver flex on this one when you put it in your ear, so you just kind of hear the driver crinkling around in there, which is a little uncomfortable, but frankly, I've heard some $3,000 earphones that have driver flex, so not the biggest problem. More for me, though, was the the treble performance here on the DQ6, unfortunately, is just, it's way too intense, at least for me. Like, it just, listening to certain music like Churches or The Cure, I found the DQ6 to be pretty much unbearably sibilant. Just really, I don't know, uncomfortable to listen to. I kind of like the EDX Pro. This does have a nice contrasty sound, a decent sense of stage and like layering and stuff like that. Again, we're talking a $30 earphone. That kind of stuff is not too shabby. But when it comes to just listening pleasure, frankly, a combination of that fin that caused me comfort issues and the sound quality, I frankly don't really find the DQ6 to be very pleasurable. So out of 5 stars, unfortunately, I'm going to give this one just 2 stars. Okay, let's pull in our next contestant, which we will go with the KZ ZEX. So this is one that I think came out most recently, except for the new CRN. And this one had a little bit of hype behind it that I had heard before, and so I was interested to check this thing out. So the ZEX is around a $25 IM, and it's unlike the other ones. It's not just a dynamic driver. It does have a dynamic driver for the low end, but it also uses, I think they call it like a Magno electro something static. I don't know, it's some other driver technology that they use for the top end. I don't want to get too much into what that technology is, except that it is technically a different type of driver. More so than the driver technology. And this is the kind of thing I try to reiterate every time. The number of drivers that they put inside of an IM, the types of drivers, it's not that they don't matter, but they matter much less than things like tuning. And the tuning here on the ZEX is frankly the bigger difference between this and the other 2 KZs that I just talked about. The tuning here on the ZEX I would describe as very warm tuning, which means it's got a very thick low end, a lot of mid bass, and then the upper mid range where you have kind of your vocal presence has got this odd scoop in it. But then it's also combined with kind of typical KZ treble emphasis, and so the result is that, frankly, I find this is another earphone I don't really enjoy listening to. I found that the comfort wise on this thing, I didn't talk about this. This is basically the exact same shell shape as the EDX Pro. So I found this more comfortable to wear than the DQ6. And sound-wise, I would actually probably say this is a little bit better than the DQ6, but I don't know. It's more tolerable because the treble isn't quite as sharp here as it is on the DQ6, but it's still, I find, a little bit unpleasant. But mostly it's just that tonality, which for me, for my taste, is really pretty off base here with the ZEX. If you're looking for something that's warm and bassy, but still has enough treble energy to cut through it and make it kind of fun, the ZEX is not a terrible earphone. But for my tastes, I don't know. I found, frankly, the bass to be pretty soft and bloomy, and then vocals of some music, especially like low vocals, just kind of masked by the bloom of the bass here. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I got much more to say here about the original ZEX. So out of 5 stars, frankly, I'd give this one also just 2 stars. Okay, so those are 3 KZs down. Now we're going to talk about the one that I think people are the most interested in, and that's not what I meant to do. You're jumping the gun. The KZ ZEX Pro, aka the CRN. This is the latest KZ earphone. This is the one with the most atypical tuning of KZ's earphones. And that's because this one was tuned by IM reviewer Crinacle. And I was excited about the tuning of this when I saw the tune, before I knew that it had anything to do with Crinacle, although based on the tune that I saw, it seemed like it was pretty suspect that either Crinacle helped them tune it or they were very much inspired by Crinacle. Turns out Crinacle helped them with it. So what do we know about here? What kind of differentiates the CRN on paper? This one's a $35 earphone. The driver configuration in here, again, is a little bit different. It's got a single dynamic driver for the bass. This one actually has a balanced armature, I believe, for the mid-range, and then another one of those Magno electrostatic something or other funky drivers for the top end, or at least that's how I imagine they split it up. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that, because I don't really know exactly how they have the frequency response divvied up, but they are at least using 3 different types of drivers in there, and that's kind of interesting about it. But that's not that interesting about it. What's most interesting is the frequency response. And when it comes to listening to it, how much does that actually play into the listening experience? And I gotta say, like, the frequency response here on the CRN, I think, is by far the best of the bunch. And that's because I like mid-range. That's right, I like mid-range. And I know a lot of people, you know, they're shopping for KZs are really just looking for a lot of bass. And if you're looking for a lot of bass, you might be disappointed with the CRN, but frankly, like, it's still got a bit of bass emphasis in there. So I don't think this is going to let bass heads, well, it's going to let bass heads down, but I don't think it's going to let people down that are looking for a nice balanced bass, because the balance between the mid-range and the bass here is what I would describe as tasteful. The mid-range, it actually has mids. They are a little bit on the warm side, so you know, they don't really dip in the lower mid-range where you might get, you know, sort of like a thin Harman dip. The CRN does not have that, which frankly I actually appreciate. And then the upper mid-range, it does have, you know, a bit of emphasis in the upper mid-range for that sort of pinagain area, but it's not as aggressive as you might see on some other earphones, especially like from Moondrop, right? My kind of personal target is something like the Moondrop Blessing 2 in terms of pinagain, and this is definitely a more relaxed vocal versus that. And so I think that effect, you know, despite the fact that this is not a very bassy sound, I would still describe this as a warm mid-range. And frankly, vocals I find a little bit pulled back. And then we get to the treble, and unfortunately that's where I think the CRN is pretty let down, if I'm perfectly honest. The frequency response, like the curve on the treble, it seems fine, but the quality of the treble here, and I don't know if it has to do with that driver, I don't know if it's purely frequency response, I'm not totally sure. I'm not going to be here to make a claim on that. But I can say is that frankly, I find the treble here on the CRN pretty unpleasant and kind of spoils the rest of the frequency response, the stuff that I did like. Because of that treble, we'll just go back to the mid-range. I found that the mid-range, you know, despite being tuned quite well, it sounds pretty dull to me, despite the fact that it's, you know, it's tuned well and it's not being drowned out by the bass. I found that the mid-range just feels pretty flat and a little bit low on detail. And then you get to the treble specifically, and frankly, it's where it gets a little bit on the harsh side. It's a little sibilant. I would say it was not nearly as bad as the treble on the DQ6, so that much is good. But I did find it to be a little bit sibilant, harsh, and honestly, even more so than just the sibilance and the harshness. It's weird. Like the treble here on the CRN, I find to be both irritating, but also somehow dull, and it has this odd effect on the timbre of instruments like hi-hats and stuff like that. They really just, they sound like foreign instruments. They almost sound like they're made of plastic or something like that. It's interesting though, is that with a little bit of EQ, you can, I think, correct that quite a bit. And I'll pull in just kind of an example to show you what that EQ looks like. This is not me playing around with a lot of EQ. I think someone on Reddit suggested doing something like this, but if you pulled, at least for my ears, if I pull down 8 kilohertz by about 5 decibels and then pump up the air by another 5 decibels, adding that little bit of contrast into it significantly improves the treble. But I don't really review earphones with EQ, so I got to review it as is, and to be perfectly honest, as is out of the box, I don't know. I despite the really nice tuning on this thing, I found myself not really enjoying it. Part of it, actually, I should go back to this. I've kind of skipped over the physical stuff here on the CRN. Because the frequency response is kind of the point with this one, but this one actually seems to use the same shell as the DQ6. So while I think it's a very, very handsome earphone, and for $35, the build quality in this is frankly pretty phenomenal. Unfortunately for my ear, it's just really uncomfortable for the exact same reasons. It's this fin right here just presses on the upper part of my concha, like right in here, and creates a pressure point that after 15-20 minutes is surprisingly uncomfortable. So in combination with that uncomfortable fit and the treble that is just really not very pleasant, you know, it's a little crunchy, a little sibilant, a little dead in the air. Frankly, I found it to be actively unpleasant. And an interesting effect of that too, like this is where like I start to question myself and like how much I understand frequency response, because when I apply this EQ, all right, this EQ is affecting only the very top end of the frequency response. When I apply this, it doesn't just fix my issues with the sibilance and the crashiness and sort of the timbre on things like cymbals. When I apply this EQ, it actually seems to open up the mid-range. It seems to add sort of a sense of resolution to the mid-range, and it even makes the bass feel more defined. Without this EQ, just listening to this thing raw, the bass, you know, the curve is nice. It's well isolated in the sub bass, but it does still come across as not really having a very sharp leading transient edge, which, look, we're talking about a $30 earphone or a $35 earphone, so maybe that's to be expected, but I found it to be frankly pretty unpleasant with things like bass guitars in Cigarettes After Sex to be just kind of a little bit muddy, woolly, and soft. So those are basically my thoughts here on the KZ Crinacle CRN. Out of 5 stars, I'm going to go ahead and give this one 3 stars for, you know, an excellent tune, and it can be, I think, salvaged with a little bit of EQ if you don't mind using EQ. I myself, not a big EQ person, so I don't know. In combination with the somewhat let down of the sound and the uncomfortable fit, unfortunately, that's about as good as I think Crinacle was able to make this thing. So, folks, those are my thoughts here on a handful of the latest KZ memes and some of the biggest stuff that's come out lately. If you're interested in checking out any of these, I do have links to all of them in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you found this review helpful, informative, or I don't know, you had a decent time, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, ding the YouTube bell. That's 3. That's how the Germans count. Ding the YouTube bell so that YouTube will let you know next time I'm live. And then you can be here having a conversation with me like the folks who are here in the live chat now. Until then, have a good weekend, happy holidays, and I'll see you in the next super review, unless you're here live, in which case, hang out, let me grab a sip of water, and let's have a chat.